The greatest meta ever told.
So we've got a really good topic, Dr. Krauss. The greatest meta ever told. Are you ready to do this?
No, but I'll follow your lead.
Well, I like that. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Dustin Plantholt. I'm called the Count of Monte Crypto out of Forbes, Monaco. I'm a crypto editor, and I'm here with a Nobel physicist, a world-renowned physicist, Dr. Lawrence Krauss.
Thank you. Anyway, yeah,
all
5 or 10 of you.
You might actually be like the smartest guy on the stage. You know that, right?
I don't know. That remains to be seen, Dustin.
Well, it doesn't. So our topic is really interesting. The greatest meta ever told. What does it even mean to you? Because I think I made up the topic name.
I like to think first it's a takeoff of the title of one of my books. Which
It was.
Is the greatest story ever told so far, which probably relates to meta because it really describes how the universe that we experience is an illusion. And I kind of think that's related to the metaverse that you guys are talking about.
Well, I like that. So you said that it's an illusion. Like in many aspects, business is a mirage. So let's talk about an illusion. What is an illusion by your standard?
Well, what I mean is that what we experience on our everyday level, the universe as we know with solid objects and tables that you can't fall through, is an approximation to a real universe, which is really quite different at its fundamental level. And that's what we as physicists have been exploring. And so when I hear about illusions of crypto or metaverses, it doesn't really mean a lot to me in the sense that we already make do with living with an illusion, and we don't even know how much of an illusion we live with. Every day we discover new aspects of the universe that tell us that the universe we experience is just kind of an accident, and the real universe is much more interesting.
You know, I'm going to ask you a question that I asked you in Cairo, Egypt. How big is the universe?
It's really big. We don't know. That's, actually, and a shameless plug, I just finished a new book last week called The Known Unknowns, which is what we don't know about the universe. But one of the really neat things about the universe is we have no idea how big it is. In fact, we have no idea if our universe is the only universe, which is even semantically different, because when I was growing up, universe had a different meaning than it has now. It meant everything. Everything that ever could be and everything ever was. Now we operationally mean it a little differently. The universe is every region of space that we could have once communicated with or could communicate with in the future. And if you take that definition, there could be many, many universes, and in fact the laws of physics could be different in each universe. We call that a multiverse, which is a little different than the metaverse. But I would say that's currently the favored picture of physics right now.
So what do you think is one of the misconceptions when people think about the universe?
There's so many. Probably that where we live is somewhere special. I think that's probably, we all tend to think that the universe revolves around us. I'm often accused of it. And the sun is in a random place in the outskirts of a relatively boring galaxy in the middle of nowhere. And the fact that we're not the center, and there is no center of the universe, I think that's probably the other notion. That everyone thinks if the universe began in a Big Bang, there has to be some center. But in fact, there isn't. The Big Bang was everywhere at the same time, because everything we now see was once contained in a region smaller than the size of an atom, which is really amazing when you think about it. All of the mass of 100 billion galaxies, each containing 100 billion stars, all of that mass and energy was contained in a region smaller than the size of a single atom. It still boggles my mind when I think of that.
It sounds to me that what you've become is a lifelong learner, that you're still curious.
Well, I think we should all be lifelong learners. I think that's the whole point. In fact, that was the original intent of the internet, I think, was to allow people more access to learning. Unfortunately, what's happened is it gives people more access to not only information, but misinformation. And the new challenge of education in the 21st century is not piling facts on people, but teaching people how to learn the difference between sense and nonsense, how to filter what they read on or see on the internet. And that's a whole new skill, and I don't think we're teaching young people how to do it, actually.
So I'm going to ask you a question, and this one's going to come from my cinematographer, Ninja. Could this actually be a matrix?
You know, everyone loves the idea that we're in a matrix, and not just because of a movie. I mean, we've all thought of it at some point, I'm sure, especially as digital games, watching the gaming over there, as those become more sophisticated and resemble real life more, the question is, well, could we be just a game in someone else's computer simulation? And the answer is, I think it's kind of a sterile question. I hate to say it, but first of all, there's no evidence that we live in a matrix, and generally, all the evidence is against it. Usually when you see that kind of thing, there's usually pixels that don't work, and there's not any pixels in this room that seem to not be working. But moreover, it kind of begs the question, which is, okay, so let's say we're a matrix in someone else's simulation. Are they a matrix in someone else's simulation? And are they a matrix? Is it turtles all the way down? And I think it doesn't answer any questions. But I was just thinking about it. I picked up one of the many free bits of stuff being handed around here, and it was a 16 gigabyte drive. They're just giving them away. And I remember when I taught at Yale 30 years ago, I bought what was then the largest hard drive at the university, which was a 1 gigabyte hard drive for our computer simulations. Cost me $25,000 of my research funds, and now they're giving away 16 gigabyte hard drives for free. And I think that really means that when you think about matrices, what we're seeing now is just the tip of the iceberg. Computer technology is developing so fast, and I wrote about it in the physics of Star Trek 25 years ago, but I think what we're soon going to see are 3D simulations, where very similar to the holodeck on Star Trek, actually, where you walk in. The difference is there won't be holodeck matter, but it's only limited by computer technology right now and processing. We already have holographic technology, and so simulations are going to become more and more like reality. But that doesn't mean that reality doesn't exist, and I tend to, maybe because I'm a physicist, I tend to like the idea of reality.
I like that. So let's talk about species. Are we the only species in the universe? I mean, is there more?
Well, again, you're asking me questions I don't know the answer to, but I think it's highly unlikely. I mean, there are 100 billion stars in our galaxy, and we now know, I mean, astrophysicists like me used to calculate and demonstrate that most stars probably had planets around them. But we now know that pretty well every star has planets around them, planets like we never even imagined. And so imagine there's 100 billion solar systems in our galaxy alone, and our galaxy is just one of 100 billion galaxies in the observable universe. It's hard for me to imagine that we're the only life, intelligent life. I mean, as Carl Sagan once said, if that's the case, it's an awful waste of space. And we now know that the materials that led to the evolution of life on Earth are ubiquitous. Organic materials, the basis of amino acids, even now recently, even maybe RNA, all those materials are already in interstellar space, sunlight, water. So, and life evolved on Earth about as soon as it could have, given the laws of physics. So I expect that life is ubiquitous. I expect we'll find evidence of other genesis of life even in our solar system, in the moons of Jupiter or Saturn, in Europa or Io or Enceladus. But the question, of course, is, does intelligent life exist? That's what really matters.
I like that. So now kind of going into immortality, this word called the metaverse.
Yeah.
That we're all trying to become immortals in some way. So consciousness, what is it?
Consciousness? I wrote about it in my new book, and the answer is we don't know. Again, it's one of the biggest mysteries, I think. We can't even define consciousness as well. In researching my new book, I was looking at a lot of consciousness researchers. Not only did they give conflicting views of consciousness, but most of them avoid the definition. It's a remarkable phenomenon, and I suspect, frankly, a colleague of mine, an idol, a physicist named Richard Feynman, once said, if you can't build it, you don't understand it. And I suspect the only way we'll really understand consciousness is not with human consciousness, because we're trapped in our own minds, is actually if we can build systems that become conscious. What you might call AI, although I don't think AI is either artificial or intelligent right now. But ultimately, the way we'll learn about how consciousness develops, I think, is by developing systems that are self-aware and conscious. And I see no ultimate obstacle to doing that. What I do think is that we're very, very far away from doing that. But I think that's the way we'll learn about consciousness. And because I think ultimately the problem with trying to learn about consciousness by understanding what you're thinking or I'm thinking is like David Hume said, where reason is the slave of passion. We imagine why we're thinking what we think. We imagine why we're doing what we're doing. But usually it has nothing to do with the real reasons why we're doing what we're doing.
I love the way you kind of walk that down and explain it so I can understand it. So talking about that next generation or the next level, because you get to meet with some of the brightest minds in the world that don't allow the barrier of it's not here yet to stop them from thinking about it. So what are some of the things from an innovation standpoint that you're hearing that's out there?
Well, I think there's no doubt that from the point of view what might be relevant to some of the people in this room is quantum computing, which I think is, I remember when people were first talking about it as physicists, and it seemed fascinating but totally impractical. And now it's fascinating and only mildly impractical. And the idea of using a fundamental law of quantum mechanics, which is that at the quantum level, and this is one of the illusions about the world, we imagine we're doing something concrete right now, having this discussion, but electrons are doing many things at the same time. They're spinning in many directions, they're in many different places at the same time until we measure them. And if we can utilize that property of quantum mechanics, that systems can do many different things at the same time, then they can do many different calculations at the same time, and that's the basis of quantum computing. But of course, one of the reasons the quantum world is so strange is it's hard to maintain what's called quantum coherence. And that's the challenge of quantum computing, is to have systems that can behave quantum mechanically, but still interface with the classical world without being destroyed. And that's the challenge to quantum computing right now. But it's a challenge that looks like it's being met in many different ways, and it'll be fascinating and important, as you know, for blockchains and cryptography, because one of the things that caused the reason that national security, that the NSA and other agencies in the US are so fascinated by quantum computers is that it was shown that a quantum computer can, if it's developed, can quickly defeat the standard algorithm for encoding information using large prime numbers and finding the factors of large prime numbers. That a quantum computer could do that in a real time, and that means you're going to need a new way of encoding. And that's fascinating and interesting, but the good news about quantum computers is they also allow you new ways to check for eavesdroppers. So it could be the technology of the 21st century, or it could be hype. We'll see.
So as someone who studies the universe and all things, what is the greatest threat that we face as a species?
The greatest threat we face as a species is probably ourselves, as we're seeing right now on this planet. One of the concerns, I have lots of concerns, but one of the concerns is we can develop technology faster than society can adapt to that technology. And we're seeing that now in the internet and fake news and other things. But we're also seeing, as a physicist, I was chairman of the board of sponsors of the Bolton the Atomic Scientists, which was, the first chairman was Albert Einstein and Robert Oppenheimer. I was very honored to be in that tradition. But it created the doomsday clock for a reason, to alert people to the dangers of nuclear weapons. And we're seeing a world right now where we're potentially as close to the realistic use of nuclear weapons as we were perhaps the last time was the Cuban Missile Crisis. And so technology is remarkable, and it's not inherently bad or inherently good. In fact, in general, it makes our lives better, but we as a society need to learn how to adapt, and that's my concern, that we can build things faster than we can adapt to them.
Now, most people are very impulsive. I'm going to put my hand up and say I'm one of them. How do you make a decision? Like, when do you finally come to the point where you're like, okay, this is what I believe, and here's why I believe it? What's that process go into that you're not just becoming indoctrinated on one thing, that you're allowing yourself to learn?
Well, let me say, first of all, I never use the word believe. I was just talking to someone last night at one of the events, kept asking me what I believed, and I don't believe anything. I don't like to use the word believe. Things are either likely or they're unlikely, and there are reasons why that's the case. But generally, as a scientist, I'm skeptical of everything I read, and what I need to do is to look and see, okay, the first question I ask is a question that the publisher of the New York Times used to like to say, one of my mantras, is I like to keep an open mind, but not so open that my brains fall out. Okay? And so the question is, if I read something in the newspaper or in a scientific article, do I have to say, in order for me to accept that, do my brains have to fall out? Namely, does it disagree with everything else I understand about the universe? And if it's the case, I should be highly suspicious of it. And the next thing I should do is not look in an echo chamber to see that idea reinforced, but to look at competing ideas, and that's the way science works, because when an article comes out, if it's wrong, people will attack it, and that's good. Attacking ideas is a good thing. Unfortunately, we live in a society now where attacking ideas is verboten, but it's the way we learn, by putting ideas into a common marketplace of ideas and allowing people to attack those ideas if they're wrong is a way we make progress. And so I constantly try, when I'm as a scientist and generally when I'm reading things on the internet, to ask, okay, does this make sense? If not, let me look to see if there are other sources that contradict that. And that's the kind of thing that, as I say, we need to teach children, because there's just so much out there that we have to teach kids how to ask questions and be willing to say, I don't know, and be willing to find out, and how to find out, which means not to have an echo chamber, among other things.
So how do you do that? I mean, if you've come from a background, maybe it's religion or your political belief, how do you get yourself to a place where you become a learner again? Because a lot of us get to a spot where we're the knowers. Well, we know.
Well, I mean, it's a good question. I think we all should be lifelong learners. And I do think that's a great aspect of the internet. It gives you access to things. I mean, I can have access to things. When I write books now, I have access to information that before I'd have to go to a library and scour the library and search the shelves and hope the article wasn't missing. And now in a minute, I can find things that I was looking for before. So I think the idea is to, first of all, constantly ask questions, and also constantly be fascinated. I mean, the universe is so damn fascinating. I'm amazed when people aren't fascinated every day when they wake up by what's around us. And I think that's what you can encourage kids to do. And people are naturally that way when they're children, and we beat it out of them in schools by forcing them to memorize things and forcing them to regurgitate facts. And so, but I think there's no problem with being a lifelong learner. And I suspect also, as we live longer, and as the world changes with people working at home, that people will have many more than one career. One career was kind of the norm in olden days, and now I don't think that's going to be the norm anymore. And that'll require you to learn a whole new skill set. I'm kind of old, and it's harder for me to learn new skill sets, but younger people can do that no problem. I remember a friend of mine who's a Nobel Prize-winning physicist said, what he does is he has graduate students who read absolutely everything, and they can tell him what to look at. And young people can do that. So I rely on young people, and I hope that we're having a generation of young people who are still willing to look out and learn and not just look at tweets all day long.
Well, I'm down to my final two questions for you. You have, in my opinion, one of the most fascinating shows in the world. I love tuning into it. So tell us about the Origins podcast.
Yeah, no, I'm lucky with the Origins podcast. I have a nice Rolodex. What I strongly believe is that science and culture are tied together. So we try and have in-depth, intelligent discussions with a give and take about topics that may be controversial, with people ranging from Nobel Prize-winning scientists to celebrities like Ricky Gervais or Woody Allen or public intellectuals like Noam Chomsky. And for me, it's a challenge because I try and read everything they've written, but it's an opportunity to allow everyone to see people in a way they haven't seen before. In fact, I just reposted an old dialogue I did with an actor who's a friend of mine, Johnny Depp, who's been in the news a lot. And what we tried to do was give a view of him in a way that you won't see in this standard celebrity nonsense. So I think people really want to learn what people at the forefront are really talking about and thinking, and that's what I try and do with the Origins podcast, is give people an opportunity to not have a soundbite, but to listen for an hour or two to what I hope is an intelligent conversation, which is not an interview, but a dialogue. And, we'll see. Some people like it.
All right, so now as we go to the last minute, tell us what you're working on now. Tell us about the book.
Well, as I say, I just finished my new book, which is always makes me feel like I'm suddenly free. Because each book I try and learn something, otherwise they all become the same book. And with the known unknowns, which by the way is a takeoff of a famous quote from none other than Donald Rumsfeld, and some people are already upset that I quoted Donald Rumsfeld as if quoting Donald Rumsfeld is a sin. He made a quote that was a very intelligent quote, and it seems to me that the known unknowns are the most interesting things we can think about. It takes us to the edge of knowledge. What we know we don't know about the universe and it ranges from space and time and matter and life to consciousness, the big questions that all of us ask. And I try and take people to the very edge and hopefully encourage some young person to take over from here.
I love that, and now as we end it, the person that taught me how to juggle was Penn from Penn & Teller, true story, at the Las Vegas airport. You have a very special relationship with Penn.
Penn is an amazing guy. He reads more than anyone I know. People think of him as a magician, but he's the most disciplined learner, lifelong learner I've ever met, and I respect him immensely because of that.
Thank you again, everybody, for your time. Thank you, audience. Dr. Krauss,
Thanks.
always a pleasure. Thanks for
Dustin.
joining
it's
us.
always great to talk to you. Thanks.